Move, move, move! Claire screamed into dead radio static, already sliding her rifle left as the first SEAL crumpled behind the boulder. If you love stories about courage, loyalty, and people who refuse to quit when the world says give up, subscribe to this channel right now. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. The mission brief lasted 47 minutes. Claire Donovan sat in the back corner of the operations room and did not say a single word. She did not need to. She had already memorized the terrain map before the briefing started. She had already calculated wind elevation, temperature drop at altitude, and the 3 most likely enemy observation posts based on satellite imagery that most of the men in that room were still struggling to interpret. She had already run the math on engagement distances, exit trajectories, and the specific angle of morning light that would hit the ridge at exactly the moment the SEAL team was scheduled to enter the valley. She had done all of that before breakfast, but the men in that room did not know any of it. What they saw when they looked at Claire Donovan was a woman sitting quietly in the corner. A female sniper in a room full of operators who had spent their entire careers believing that role did not belong to her. Chief Warrant Officer Ryan Mercer made that clear before the briefing even ended. He waited until Colonel Whitmore stepped out to take a call. Then he turned around in his chair, looked directly at Claire, and said it loud enough for everyone to hear. "No offense, Sergeant, but I've been on 4 combat deployments. I've never once needed a babysitter, and I'm not starting now." Nobody laughed, but nobody pushed back either. Claire looked at him, steady, quiet. The way a mountain looks at weather. "You're right," she said. "You don't need a babysitter." She paused just long enough. "You need someone who can keep you alive when the babysitting stops working." Mercer's jaw tightened. He turned back around without answering. Lieutenant Commander Ethan Cross, sitting 2 seats down from Mercer, caught Claire's eye for exactly half a second. His expression did not change, but something shifted behind it. Something that looked almost like he was still making up his mind. That was fine. Claire had spent her entire career surrounded by men still making up their minds about her. She was used to it. What she was not used to, what she had never quite gotten used to, no matter how many missions she completed or how many confirmed kills she added to a file that most people in this building were not cleared to read, was the specific kind of silence that fell over a room when she walked into it. Not hostile silence. Not exactly. More like the silence of people recalibrating. People seeing something that did not match the picture in their heads and taking a long moment to decide how to file it. She had been recalibrated against her entire life. Born in Harlan County, Kentucky, the daughter of a coal miner who taught her to shoot before she could ride a bike. She grew up on 3 things: hard work, mountain wind, and the absolute certainty that nobody was going to hand her anything she wanted. Her father believed in 2 rules. Know what you're doing. Do it better than anyone else in the room. Claire had followed both of those rules without exception for 31 years. She joined the Army at 18, scored in the top 1% on every marksmanship evaluation they put in front of her. Got pushed toward administrative roles twice, pushed back twice. Was told the sniper program wasn't designed for women. Applied anyway. Scored higher on the qualification course than the next 3 candidates combined. They found reasons to delay her placement for 8 months. She waited. When the placement finally came through, she showed up on the first day and put a grouping through a target at 900 meters that the range instructor initially refused to believe was real. He made her do it again. She did it again. He asked her a 3rd time. She looked at him and said very politely, "Sir, I can keep going if you'd like, but we're burning daylight, and I'd rather spend the afternoon on the moving target range." He signed her paperwork that afternoon. That was 6 years ago. Since then, she had been on 11 missions that the official record listed as support operations, and that anyone with the right clearance level would recognize as some of the most complex long-range engagements in the last decade. 2 of those missions involved shots that the tactical community still debated at conferences, not because anyone doubted they happened, but because the geometry involved made people uncomfortable. Shots that should not have been possible. Shots that Claire made because she understood something. Most snipers took years to learn, and some never learned at all that the rifle was only part of the equation. The bigger part was the space between the trigger pull and the target. The wind, the elevation, the light. The way a human body moved when it believed it was safe versus the way it moved when something in the animal brain whispered danger. She read all of it. She had been reading it since she was 7 years old, lying in the grass behind her father's house, watching deer move through the tree line, and learning, really learning how living things betrayed themselves. Colonel Whitmore knew all of this. That was why he requested her specifically. Not because the Pentagon wanted a diversity photograph. Not because somebody needed to check a box on a personnel report. Because James Whitmore had been in this business for 28 years, and in 28 years he had developed one skill above all others, the ability to look at a person and understand exactly what they were capable of when everything went wrong. He had looked at Claire Donovan. He had read her file 3 times. And he had picked up the phone. The pre-mission equipment check happened at 2100 hours in a staging bay that smelled like gun oil and military-grade anxiety. 16 SEALs moved through their checks with the quiet efficiency of people who had done this so many times that the ritual had become almost meditative. Magazines seated. Radios tested. Night optics calibrated. Everyone moving in their own orbit connected by the invisible thread of shared training and shared risk. Claire worked on the far side of the bay with her spotter sergeant, Maya Reyes. Maya was 26 years old, compact with dark eyes that missed very little and a dry sense of humor that she deployed like a precision instrument. She and Claire had worked together on 3 previous operations. They had developed the kind of communication that didn't require many words, a shorthand built from shared hours, lying in hide positions, reading the same landscapes, and trusting each other's eyes. Maya was checking the rangefinder when she said without looking up, "Mercer's been staring at us for the last 4 minutes." "I know," Claire said. "You going to do anything about it?" "Already did." Maya glanced up. "The thing you said in the briefing. It landed where I needed it to land. Cross heard it." "I know he heard it." Maya set the rangefinder down and looked at Claire directly. "You think he's going to be a problem?" Claire thought about it for a moment. Not long. She didn't need long. "Mercer's going to be exactly as much of a problem as he's always been," she said. "He's a good operator who carries something heavy and takes it out on the wrong people. He's not dangerous to us unless he lets it get in the way of the mission. And if he does, then we deal with it then." Maya nodded. That was good enough for her. What neither of them said, what didn't need to be said, was that they had already dealt with worse. They had already been in situations where the people who were supposed to be on their side were the most immediate problem in the room. That was a specific kind of operational weight that female soldiers carried into every mission, sometimes heavier than the equipment on their backs. You learned to account for it. You built it into your calculations the same way you built in wind drift and bullet drop. You did not let it stop you. Across the bay, Ryan Mercer zipped his kit closed and caught the eye of Staff Sergeant Danny Cho, his closest friend on the team. Cho raised an eyebrow. Mercer shook his head, once a small, tight motion that meant exactly what it had always meant between them. Not now, later. Cho let it go, but later was coming. The helicopters lifted at 0300 hours. Claire and Maya inserted separately from the SEAL team as planned. Different bird, different flight path, different landing zone. The sniper pair would move to their overwatch position on the eastern ridge and be set up before the SEALs reached the valley floor. That was the geometry of the operation. Claire and Maya high above eyes on the approach routes, radio linked to Ethan Cross's command frequency. The flight in was rough. Mountain air at altitude had its own personality, and tonight it was pushing hard from the north, rocking the helicopter in long, lurching swings that made the crew chief grip his handrails and stare at the floor. Maya sat across from Claire and looked completely unbothered. She was eating a protein bar. Claire watched the darkness out the porthole and ran through the map in her mind. The valley was roughly 3 kilometers long, narrowing toward the northern end, where the pass cut through the high rock. The eastern ridge, their position rose sharply on the right flank, giving elevation advantage over almost the entire valley floor. The terrain was broken with heavy boulder fields and scattered scrub growth that would provide reasonable concealment. But there was one problem she kept coming back to. One thing on that map that had been pulling at her since she first studied the imagery. The western cliff face. It was almost vertical. No obvious approach routes. Every terrain analysis had marked it as impassable, which was exactly the kind of assessment that an intelligent enemy would lean on if they were planning an ambush. Because impassable meant unmonitored. And unmonitored was exactly what you wanted when you were pre-positioning a force to box in a target. She almost said something in the briefing. She hadn't, because she wasn't certain, because the imagery was inconclusive, because raising an objection based on intuition in a room full of operators who already doubted her presence would have cost credibility she hadn't yet built. She filed it instead. She kept it running in the background the way she kept everything running quiet, constant, ready to surface the moment it became relevant. The helicopter began its descent. Claire tucked the thought away and picked up her rifle case. Time to work. They moved through the dark for 90 minutes. No lights. No conversation beyond the occasional hand signal. The terrain was punishing uneven ground covered in loose shale that shifted and slid underfoot, demanding constant balance adjustments and slow, deliberate foot placement. The cold at this elevation was real, the kind that found the gaps in your gear and settled into joints and fingers, and reminded you that the mountain did not care about your mission timeline. Claire moved like she had been born to it. She had, in a sense. The Kentucky ridges she'd grown up navigating were less dramatic than this, but the fundamental relationship with high terrain was the same. The mountain had its own rules, and you either learned them or you paid for the lesson. She read the ground ahead with her feet, as much as her eyes adjusting her weight on every step, and she was aware at all times of her noise signature, her visual profile against the sky, and the wind direction, and what it might be carrying toward anyone watching. Maya moved just as well. They were matched that way, two people who had made their peace with difficult ground and trusted each other to keep the same pace without discussion. At the 2-hour mark, they reached the primary overwatch position. Claire spent 12 minutes on site assessment before she settled. She found a natural shelf in the rock formation that gave her an unobstructed sightline down the full length of the valley while keeping her body below the ridgeline, invisible from below, invisible from the opposite face. She set up the rifle, adjusted the bipod, confirmed her zero reference point, and ran a quick scan of the valley floor. Everything looked exactly like the map said it would look, which meant nothing because the map did not know what the map did not know. "You're quiet," Maya said, settling in beside her with the spotting scope. "I'm thinking about the west face." Maya was quiet for a moment. Then, the impassable cliff. "Yeah. Intel said no movement there in 6 weeks. Intel also said this was a simple reconnaissance mission." Maya let that sit. Then she raised the spotting scope and began a slow, methodical scan of the western cliff face, left to right, bottom to top, the kind of scan that took patience and refused to rush. 3 minutes passed. "I've got nothing," she said. "Keep looking." "Claire, keep looking, Maya." Another 2 minutes. The radio link with Cross's team showed them still en route 8 minutes from the valley entry point. Everything was on schedule. Everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. Then Maya's voice changed. Not loud, not alarmed, just different. "There." "Where?" "Upper quadrant west face. 3rd shelf from the top. Something moved." Claire brought her scope to the position, held on it, waited. 30 seconds. Nothing. 45 seconds. And then there, a shape that wasn't rock, an angle that wasn't natural, the specific way a human shoulder caught light differently than stone. Her stomach went cold. Not one shape. 3, then 5. Then she kept counting and stopped counting because the number didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the geometry. What mattered was that the position Maya had found was elevated, covered and angled directly toward the valley entry point, where 16 SEALs were going to be standing in less than 8 minutes. She keyed the radio. "Talon Lead, this is Overwatch. Stop your movement. I say again, stop all movement." Cross's voice came back immediately. He was already that kind of commander, someone who responded before he questioned. "Overwatch, Talon Lead. We're stopped. Talk to me." "I have movement on the west face. Multiple contacts upper shelf. They're positioned on your entry point. This is not a patrol. I believe you're looking at a prepared ambush." A beat of silence. She could hear Cross processing it, the way a good commander processed unexpected information fast but not impulsive. Weighing. Calculating. How many contacts? Still assessing. At least 12, probably more. They're using the rock formation for cover. They were good Talon-led, really good. But they moved. Can you engage from your current position? She ran the angle. West faced to her current east ridge position. The geometry was wrong. The intervening terrain created dead ground that would put half of those positions outside her effective engagement window. Negative. Current position gives me poor angles. I need to move north along the ridge. How long? 15 minutes if I push, 10 if I'm stupid about it. She said it straight, no dramatics, just math. Cross came back. Mercer. He was talking to his team now, not her. You hearing this? Mercer's voice on the radio was flat. I'm hearing it. Assessment. A pause that lasted just slightly too long. Could be nothing. Could be a scout position. With 12 plus contacts. Could be a coincidence. Claire kept her voice even. Chief Warrant Mercer, the positioning is deliberate. The angle to your entry point is intentional. If this were a scout position, they would be mobile. These contacts are static and oriented toward your approach vector. This is a kill box. Another pause. Or, Mercer said, it's a female sniper who hasn't been in a real combat zone in 3 years and is seeing ghosts in the dark. The radio went silent. 14 lives hanging on a disagreement. And then Ethan Cross said something that Claire would remember for the rest of her life. He said, Overwatch move north. Everybody else hold position. We wait for confirmation. Not, Mercer's probably right. Not, let's push through and assess on the ground. He trusted her. She moved north along the ridge at a pace that was objectively dangerous. Not stupid dangerous. Calculated dangerous. The difference being that she had already run the risk assessment in her head and made the deliberate choice to accept the elevated risk because the alternative was worse. She moved fast, and she moved low, keeping the ridge line between herself and the valley below, using the broken terrain as cover in a way that required constant real-time adjustment. Maya stayed on the primary position. That was the right call. 2 people moving at speed doubled the noise signature and halved the speed advantage. Claire moved alone. She was 200 meters north of her starting position when she found the shot line she needed. The angle to the west face opened up. She could see the upper shelf clearly now, and what she saw confirmed everything she had told Cross and everything Mercer had dismissed. They were there. 16 fighters at minimum. Professionally positioned. Communication lines between groups. And at the northern end of the shelf, partially shielded by a rock, overhang, a PKM machine gun crew oriented to sweep the valley entry point the moment the SEALs stepped into it. She felt something happen in her chest. Not fear. Something more specific than fear. The tight, clarifying sensation that came when you understood exactly how close to catastrophe everything had just come. 8 minutes. If Cross had pushed his team forward on Schedule 16, SEALs would have stepped into the kill box 8 minutes from now, and the machine gun team alone would have put the entire mission in a different category. She keyed the radio. Talon-led. Overwatch. I have confirmed. 16 plus enemy fighters west face upper shelf. PKM crew at the north end oriented directly toward your entry point. This is an organized ambush with pre-positioned crew-served weapons. Do not approach the valley. Cross came back in 5 seconds. Copy all. We're holding. Stand by. Then she heard Mercer's voice. He was not talking on the radio this time. He was talking to someone beside him, and his radio was open and he didn't know it. Can't believe Cross is actually going to pull 16 SEALs back based on one woman having a feeling. Cross cut him off. His voice was quiet and very hard. Mercer, your radio's hot. A beat. Sir, not now. Silence. And in the silence, Claire did what she always did when someone used her gender as a reason to discount her judgment. She went back to work. She had 16 fighters to track a machine gun position to monitor, and a SEAL team that was alive right now, specifically because she had looked at an impassable cliff face and kept looking until it showed her the truth. That was the job. The rest was noise. The next 40 minutes were the tense, exhausting work of a holding situation. Cross repositioned his team to a covered location 800 meters south of the valley entry. They were safe for the moment, but, for the moment, was not a sustainable operational condition. The mission timeline was already blown. Extraction was now complicated by the fact that the entire approach route was potentially compromised. Command back at base was pressing for updates, and the enemy on the west face was not moving. They were waiting. Which meant they knew a SEAL team was somewhere in the area. Which meant the mission had been compromised before it started. Claire worked that problem while she maintained observation on the west face. They're not moving, she told Maya over the team channel. 12 hours in a static ambush position at altitude in this temperature, these are disciplined fighters. Professional, they're not militia. Which means someone told them exactly when and where to be, Maya said. Yes. Leak. Has to be. Cross was already running the same math. She could hear it in the questions he was asking. Command clipped, specific the questions of someone who was starting to understand that the danger was not only outside the wire, but that problem was above her pay grade right now. Her problem was the 16 fighters on the west face, and the 18 additional contacts she had now identified on the valley floor in concealed positions, a total force of 34 enemy combatants that had been pre-positioned with the explicit intention of destroying the SEAL team. 34 against 16. Even with her overwatch, those numbers were wrong, she told Cross. His response was quiet. Overwatch, I need an honest assessment. If we have to move through, can you give us a path? She studied the terrain, the positions, the coverage overlaps, the dead ground between contact groups. She ran the math. Talon led, not from my current position. The east ridge gives me good angles on the shelf, but the valley floor contacts are below my line of sight in sections. I'd be shooting into dead ground. What would you need? She already knew the answer. She had known it since she counted 34 fighters and started looking at the terrain geometry. There's a peak, she said. Above my current position, maybe 300 meters of elevation gain. From the top, I'd have unobstructed sight lines to everything in the valley. Every contact, every position. Can you reach it? She looked up at it. The route was steep, exposed, and extremely unkind. Parts of it would put her directly in line of sight of the west face contacts for 40 meters of climbing. She would have no cover, no concealment. Only movement and speed, and the hope that the enemy was looking down at the valley floor instead of up at the ridge. I can reach it, she said. Maya's voice came in on their private channel, the two-person frequency, that only the two of them shared. Claire, that road is going to be lit up if they look right. I know. You'd be completely exposed for maybe 3 minutes of climbing. I know, Maya. Then I'm going with you. No. She said it without hesitation. I need you on the scope here. I need eyes on that shelf while I move. If they start tracking me, I need to know before they engage. A long silence. This is not a discussion, Claire said. This is the plan. I move. You watch. You call it if they pick me up. And if they do pick you up, then you call it and I move faster." Maya didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was exactly what Claire needed it to be, steady, professional, and with the specific quality of someone who trusted their partner completely, even when they hated the plan. "I've got your back," Maya said. "Go." Claire picked up her rifle. She looked at the peak above her. She had been climbing mountains since she was old enough to follow her father up the ridges behind their house. She had done it in full gear in training and combat equipment in the field, in conditions that made tonight look reasonable. She had never done it under potential enemy observation, while carrying a mission that put 16 lives directly in the result column. She started climbing. The first 200 meters were relatively protected. The ridge configuration gave her intermittent cover gaps between boulder formations where she could pause, assess, adjust her route. She moved efficiently, conserving energy without sacrificing speed, and she kept her movement patterns irregular to avoid the rhythmic predictability that gave human movement away to trained observers. She was breathing hard by the 100-meter mark, not from fitness. She was in the best shape of her life, and the elevation gain, while serious, was within her normal training parameters. The hard breathing was from adrenaline management, the specific discipline of keeping an elevated fight-or-flight response from translating into rushed, sloppy movement. She breathed through her nose. In for 4 counts, out for 4, forcing her body to stay with the plan. Maya's voice in her earpiece was a quiet, steady rhythm. "No movement on the shelf. They're holding. You're clear. Move. Still clear. Keep going. Move. Pause. I've got a head turn on contact 4. He's scanning north." She froze. Became a rock. 12 seconds. 20. Head turn back. He's looking south now. You're clear. Move. At the 180-meter mark, the protected terrain ended. She knew it would. She had mapped it in her head on the way up. The final section of the climb was an open face, 40 meters of near-vertical rock with no cover and no concealment, and the full exposure that Maya had warned her about. She paused at the last sheltered position and looked at the open face. 3 minutes. Maybe less, if she was fast. She thought about the 16 SEALs sitting in a covered position 800 meters south, waiting on an operation that had already gone wrong, holding in a location that was not safe enough to hold indefinitely. She thought about Ethan Cross trusting her assessment when his own chief warrant officer told him she was seeing ghosts. She thought about her father. "You know what you're doing. Do it better than anyone else in the room." She looked one more time at the shelf position on the west face. 34 fighters. Waiting. She started up the open face. The wind hit her immediately. At this elevation with no terrain to buffer it, the north wind was a serious physical presence pushing hard against her left side, requiring constant micro-adjustments to her balance and her route choices. She moved in short bursts, covering 5 to 8 meters before pausing in any micro-feature she could find, a rock angle, a slight concavity in the face, anything that interrupted her profile. Maya was a metronome in her ear. Clear, move, clear, move. Pause contact 2 is repositioning on the shelf. She stopped, pressed flat against the rock. The wind was loud against her ear. She couldn't hear anything beyond it, and Maya's voice, which was all she should be hearing right now. "He's moving laterally, not looking up. You're still good." "How long?" 10 seconds. Stay still." She stayed still. The wind pushed. The cold found her fingers where they gripped the rock. "He's back in position. Go." She went. 20 meters from the top. 15. Claire contact 5 just moved to the edge of the shelf. "He's got binoculars." Her stomach tightened. Looking at the valley or the ridge? Valley, valley. He's panning. She was 10 meters from the summit. 10 meters. He's panning north. He's coming around to... She accelerated. Not reckless. Controlled and fast, pulling the last section in one sustained effort, her legs driving and her hands moving over the rock, with the efficiency of someone who had done this 10,000 times before, and was now doing it one more time for the only reason that mattered. She came over the top of the peak and dropped flat on the far side of the ridgeline. Maya's voice. "He stopped panning. He's looking south. You're off his line." She lay on her back for exactly 4 seconds. 4 seconds to let the adrenaline peak and begin to recede. Then she rolled over, got behind the rifle and looked through the scope at the valley below. What she saw changed everything. From this height, from this angle, the entire battlefield was laid out in front of her like a diagram. The valley floor, the west face shelf, every position, every contact. The machine gun crew in the north, the secondary firing line on the floor. The command element, she could now see clearly, a group of 4 fighters with communications equipment at the south end of the shelf directing the operation. 34 enemy combatants. She could see all of them, every one. She keyed the radio. "Talon led, Overwatch. I'm on the peak. I have full battlefield visibility. I can see 34 contacts with complete coverage. Request permission to prepare for precision engagement on your command." Ethan Cross's voice came back, and she would remember the specific way he sounded, like a man who had made a decision and was done second-guessing it. "Overwatch, Talon led, you have the battlefield." Mercer's voice cut in sharp and urgent. "Commander, we cannot authorize one shooter." "Mercer." Cross's voice stopped him cold. "She earned it. Stand down." Silence on the radio. Then Cross again directly to her. "Claire, whatever you need. We're ready to move on your signal." She settled behind the scope. 34 targets, 16 lives, 1 rifle, 1 woman who had been told her entire career that she did not belong in this moment. She adjusted for wind. She took 1 slow, complete breath. She found the machine gun crew, and she began. The first shot broke the silence of the mountain like a thunderclap. Claire didn't watch where it landed, she already knew. She had calculated that round before she pulled the trigger, wind elevation, distance, target movement, and she was already transitioning to the second position before the sound finished rolling down the valley walls. The machine gun crew on the north end of the shelf had 1 man down before any of the 33 remaining fighters understood what had happened. The second shot came 4 seconds later. Another man down. Then she shifted entirely off the PKM crew and went for the command element at the south end of the shelf. That was the decision she had made while she was still climbing. Take the machine gun offline first. Then take the brain out of the operation. Because 34 fighters without a machine gun were a problem. 34 fighters without a machine gun and without coordination were a different kind of problem entirely. The third shot hit the man with the radio handset. She heard Cross on the team channel. "Overwatch, confirm you are engaging." "Engaging," she said. 1 word. She was already finding the 4th target. "We're reading impacts on the west face. We're standing by." The 4th shot. The 5th. 6 seconds between rounds. That was her rhythm at this range in this wind, not because she couldn't shoot faster, but because faster meant sloppier, and sloppier meant misses, and misses meant the enemy retained fighting capability and started looking for her. The pace she set was the pace the situation required. Every shot a decision. Every trigger pull the end of a calculation that began the moment she identified the target and ended when the bullet found it. On the west face shelf, organized chaos was erupting. She could see it through her scope. Fighters scrambling. Voices she couldn't hear but could read in body language, the specific kind of desperate, urgent motion that happened when a force realized it was under precision fire from an unknown position. They were looking at the valley floor, looking at the eastern ridge, looking everywhere except up, because up was impassable. Up was where she was. "Maya," she said, "I'm watching." Maya came back immediately. "They haven't found your position. Keep working." She kept working. Shot 6 went through the secondary RPG position. 1 operator carrying the launcher, another carrying the rounds. She took the launcher man first. The round carrier dropped the ammunition and ran, which was the right survival decision, and also meant that particular RPG was now out of the fight. Shot 7. A fighter who had broken from the shelf and was attempting to move north along the cliff face to get an angle on the valley below. She read the intent before he was halfway through the movement. He did not finish it. In her earpiece, she heard Cross coordinating with his team, his voice carrying the specific quality of a commander who had transitioned from defensive holding to controlled offensive thinking. Riggs, you're on the left. Kane and Cho right flank. Mercer, you're with me center. We move on my signal. Mercer's voice. Commander, we still don't have visual on the shooter's position. We don't know. We know 16 fighters are down and the PKM is silent and somebody up there is clearing us a path. We're moving. A beat. Sir. Mercer, move or stand down, right now. Silence. Then quietly. Moving. Shot 8 was the hardest one she had taken so far. The target was moving, not running, which would have been straightforward to calculate, but moving in an irregular, unpredictable pattern that suggested combat training. He had picked up on the shot sequence and was deliberately breaking the rhythm of his movement to complicate her targeting solution. She tracked him for 11 seconds. 11 seconds was a long time to hold on a moving target at this distance in this wind. She felt the cold working into the muscles of her right shoulder where the rifle rested. She felt the elevation, not physically, but in the way the math changed at altitude, the way the thinner air affected her reading of the bullet's flight path in ways that most shooters never fully internalized. She internalized them. She led him. Shot 8. He went down. Maya's voice in her ear had a specific quality, now calm, but with an undercurrent of awe that Maya would probably deny if anyone asked her about it later. 17 down, Maya said. 17 contacts eliminated. Remaining fighters are breaking into 2 groups. 8 are pulling back toward the north end of the shelf. 9 are attempting to descend the west face. The descenders are trying to flank Cross's approach route. That's what it looks like. Call it to Cross. Already on it. Maya switched channels. Talon-led Overwatch actual. 9 fighters descending the west face, likely attempting to intercept your right flank. Suggest you hold the right element until Overwatch clears the descent route. Cross came back without hesitation. Copy. Kane, Cho, hold. Overwatch, you have the west face. She was already moving the scope to the descent route. 9 fighters coming down a cliff face, which made them slow and committed and unable to change direction quickly, which meant the engagement geometry was favorable, which meant she had a window that would close the moment they reached the bottom. She started at the top. Work top to bottom. That was the principle. Take the highest targets first, because the ones below couldn't go up to help them, but the ones above could descend to reinforce the ones below. Take them in order. Close the window from the top. Shot 9. Shot 10. The descent slowed as the remaining 7 fighters understood they were exposed. 3 of them reversed direction and tried to climb back up. Too late. Too slow. The cliff face was working against them now, the same way it had worked for them when they were using it as a concealed ambush position. Shot 11. Shot 12. 4 fighters left on the descent route. She was tracking the 3rd when Maya said sharply, Clear the north group on the shelf. They've got a rocket. They're setting up. I think they found your general position. Her blood went cold. She made the call in under a second. Leave the descent route 4 fighters manageable for Cross's team once they reached the bottom, and address the rocket, which was an existential threat to her position, and everything that depended on it. She swung north, found the shelf, found the RPG team. They were fast. She would give them that. They had moved efficiently and positioned the weapon in the time it took her to work the descent route, and they were nearly at the point of launch. She could see the backblast area cleared. She could see the shooter settling into position. She fired. The shot hit the RPG tube a half-second before he would have fired. The impact destroyed the weapon and threw both crew members backward. She was back on the descent route in 4 seconds. 2 of the remaining 4 fighters had reached the base of the cliff. Cross was already reading it. Overwatch, we've got 2 tangos at the base of the west face, heading toward Kane's position. I see them, she said. 1 second. She found them. Shot 13. She had never experienced what it felt like to lose certainty in the middle of an engagement. Not like this. Not when she was the only thing standing between 60 seconds of chaos and 16 men she was responsible for. She found the second man, shot 14. "Kane Cho," Cross called. "You're clear on the right. Move now." She heard them acknowledge and move. And she heard something else. Something Maya said in a tone she had never heard Maya use before. Claire. Maya's voice was stripped down to its absolute core. No inflection, no commentary. Just the words. "Talk to me," Claire said. "The 8 remaining fighters on the North Shelf. They just split. 4 of them went west. I think they're repositioning to a higher elevation. But the other 4... Maya paused for exactly 1 second. "They're not on the shelf anymore." Claire frowned. "Where are they?" "That's the problem. I lost them behind the rock formation. But the angle they were moving, Claire, they could be working a route to your position." The peak. The impassable peak that she had climbed in the dark while Maya watched for observers. The position that if the enemy had worked out the general origin of the shots and was now looking for the logical high point on the east ridge. "How long?" she said. "If they know what they're doing, 20 minutes, maybe less." She did the math. 16 SEALs still in the approach. Cross had his team moving, but they were not yet through the valley. The mission objective, the reason all 16 of them were on this mountain tonight, had not yet been completed. They still needed time. 20 minutes. She needed to buy 20 minutes. "Maya, I need you to watch my 6. The moment you get eyes on those 4 fighters, you call it. Claire, if they reach your position, call it when you see them. I'll handle the rest." Maya didn't answer immediately. When she did, it was 3 words. "You'd better." Dig. She kept shooting. That was the job. The 4 fighters working toward her position were Maya's problem to track and her problem to deal with when they arrived. The 8 fighters, now 4 on the shelf and 4 unknown, were the tactical situation in front of her. And the SEAL team was still moving through a valley that was not yet fully secure. She kept shooting. Shot 15 took down a fighter who had repositioned to a secondary ledge on the west face and was trying to get an angle on Cross's center element. She caught him at the moment he settled in before he had fully committed to a firing position. 1 round. He did not return fire. Cross's team was inside the valley now. She could hear the change in his radio traffic, the shift from coordinated approach to close quarters movement, voices, tighter information, faster the rhythm of a team operating under real pressure in compressed space. "Overwatch, we've got movement in the northern end of the valley. I count 3 contacts on the floor moving toward our position." She found them in her scope, on them in. 3 fighters on the valley floor, who had been in the concealed secondary line, the 18 contacts she had identified earlier, the ones that had mostly broken and scattered when the shooting started, but 3 of whom had apparently decided to stand and fight. She engaged. Shot 16. Shot 17. The 3rd fighter broke and ran north, disappearing into the pass at the end of the valley. She let him go. A running man was not the immediate threat. The immediate threat was the SEAL team's exposure in the center of the valley, while she divided her attention between the active engagement and the 4 fighters working toward her peak. "Talon led 3 tangos on your valley floor, 2 down. 1 runner heading north through the pass. Recommend you keep your north element eyes forward." "Copy," Cross said. "North element, you heard her. Eyes north. Riggs, keep your head on a swivel." Riggs acknowledged. She pulled back from the scope for 3 seconds. Just 3 seconds. She rolled her right shoulder once the cold was turning into something that was working toward genuine stiffness, and she needed to stay ahead of it. She flexed her fingers against the stock. She breathed. Then she put her eye back to the scope and found something that made her stop. On the north end of the shelf, the 4 remaining fighters had done something she had not predicted. They had not repositioned. They had not attempted to descend. They had not retreated. They were setting up a second crew-served weapon. Not an RPG this time. ADSHK, a heavy machine gun that fired a round large enough to do serious damage to everything in the valley, including the rock formations Cross's team was using for cover, and that at this range and elevation would reach her position on the peak with enough velocity to be a serious problem. She had maybe 90 seconds before it was operational. She felt the specific cold clarity that came in moments like this. Not calm, because calm suggested the absence of pressure, and she was completely submerged in pressure, but something harder than calm. The state of mind that existed when fear and analysis occupied the same space, and analysis won. She found the gun. She found the crew. 3 men. One setting the bipod, one feeding the ammunition belt, one on communications calling the position to someone somewhere. She took the ammunition handler first. Without ammunition, the gun was a prop. Shot 18. The belt dropped. The handler dropped with it. The gunner tried to improvise, reaching for a secondary belt stored beside the weapon. She was already calculating the second round. Shot 19. The gunner went down. The third man, the radio operator, abandoned the weapon and ran north along the shelf, still talking into his radio, still transmitting something to whoever was on the other end of that call. She tracked him and stopped. A running man with a radio was potentially more dangerous than a man with a gun. A running man with a radio was talking to someone, telling someone something, and that someone might be the 4 fighters working toward her position, who she had not yet seen, and whose exact route Maya had not yet confirmed. She took him at 40 meters of movement. Shot 20. The shelf went silent. She scanned it, left to right. Full coverage. 2 full minutes of observation. Nothing moved. She keyed the radio. Talon led Overwatch. West face shelf appears clear. I am counting 20 enemy contacts eliminated. I have 4 unknown fighters that I believe are working toward my position from the north. Recommend you accelerate your timeline. Cross's voice came back, and she could hear it in him now, that specific quality of a commander who understood exactly what was being spent on his behalf. Overwatch, we're moving as fast as we can. What's your status? Still operational, she said. Keep moving. A beat. Then Cross said something that wasn't tactical, something that didn't belong in a radio transmission in a live combat operation. Claire, you hear me? She paused. I hear you. Don't you dare get hit. She didn't answer that. She went back to work. Blunt. Maya found the 4 fighters 7 minutes later. I've got them, she said, and her voice carried the tight precision of someone delivering bad news as cleanly as possible. North slope. They're below your position, coming up the approach route you used. They found your tracks. Claire's jaw set. Distance? 12 minutes, maybe 10. They're moving fast. She looked down at the valley. Cross's team was 2/3 through. The objective was visible. She could see the target structure from her elevation, 300 meters north of the team's current position. 10 minutes of movement, maybe 12 if they encountered resistance. 10 minutes. She had 10 minutes. And she had 4 fighters climbing toward her with her footprints to follow. She did what she always did when the variables stopped cooperating. She adapted. Maya, she said, I'm going to shift my position. Move 30 meters south along the peak. I want to be above their approach route when they come over the ridge. That puts you out of optimal angle for the valley. I know. Cross still needs Overwatch on the objective. I know that too. I can work both. 30 meters south gives me a downward angle on the approach route, and I keep line of sight on the objective. It's not ideal. What's the alternative? She didn't answer that question because Maya already knew the answer, and neither of them needed to say it out loud. The alternative was staying in her current position and being flanked from below by 4 fighters who knew exactly where she was and had nothing to lose. She picked up the rifle. She moved. 30 meters south along the peak face in terrain that did not make 30 meters easy. She moved low and fast and without hesitation, because hesitation at this point in an operation was a luxury that belonged to people in safer situations than this one. She found the new position, set up, ran a quick scan. Valley Cross's team visible, making progress. Approach route below Maya's 4 fighters closer than 12 minutes now, maybe 8. She calculated the angles. She could work both. Barely. But barely had been good enough before. She settled in and found the valley again. Cross's team was 50 meters from the objective, and then the radio exploded. "Overwatch, contact right. We have contact right." It was Riggs. His voice was still controlled, but only just the specific edge in it that happened when a trained operator encountered something that he had not expected, and that was very close and very serious. She swung to the right flank. 3 fighters on the valley floor, east side fighters she had not accounted for, fighters who had been in a position she had not seen from the original Overwatch location, and that her new angle on the peak had only just opened up for her. 3 fighters, 20 meters from Kane's position. She had a shot. She took it. Shot 21. Second contact right, he's shot 22. Third contact moving to cover. She tracked him. He was smart. He moved between the rock formations, using the terrain cutting her angles. She tracked his pattern 3 moves, predict the 4th. She held on the gap between 2 boulders. He ran through it. Shot 23. Overwatch contacts down. Right flank is clear. That was Kane's voice, and it had the specific quality of someone who had just processed a very close call. "Copy," she said. "Keep moving." And then below her she heard rocks move. Not the wind, not an animal. Something deliberate. Something careful. Something that knew it was close to what it was looking for. The 4 fighters were on the peak approach. She finished her scan of the Valley Cross's team, was at the objective 30 seconds from breach, and she shifted her rifle downward. She found the first fighter. He was good. He moved with the specific discipline of someone who had trained for exactly this kind of close approach, using the terrain keeping his profile small. He was within 40 meters of the peak crest. Behind him, she could see the other 3. She calculated quickly. 4 targets. Close range. Below her. She had elevation advantage, and they did not yet have eyes on her exact position. They were following her tracks, but they had not yet crested the ridge to see her. She had seconds. First shot closest target. Second shot the one behind him. Third and fourth shots would be tighter, because the remaining 2 would break and react. She found the lead fighter. She breathed. She pulled the trigger. Shot 24. She was already moving to the second before the first man was down. Shot 25. The third and fourth fighters broke in opposite directions, one going left, one going right, exactly as she had predicted, because that was standard contact break doctrine. And standard contact break doctrine existed because it worked, which also meant she had already calculated for it. Left target first, he was moving uphill, which was the more dangerous direction. Shot 26. The right target had gone to ground behind a rock shelf. She could hear him, but not see him. She held on the last place she had seen him and waited. 14 seconds. 20. He moved. Shot 27. Silence below the peak. She stayed completely still for 30 seconds, scanning every inch of the approach route below. Nothing moved. From the valley she heard Cross's voice, a different quality now. Not tactical. Something larger. "We have the objective. I say again, we have the objective. All elements begin withdrawal." The SEAL team had completed the mission. She released a breath she had been holding without realizing it. But the mission wasn't over, because now the SEALs had to get out, and the extraction route ran directly through a valley that she had just spent 40 minutes engaging, and somewhere in that valley and on those slopes were surviving enemy fighters who were angry and who had radios and who had been calling for reinforcement. "Talon led," she said. "Overwatch, you have the objective. That's the good news." Cross came back. "And the bad news? You still have to walk out of that valley. I've eliminated 27 contacts. I counted 34 at the start. That means 7 are unaccounted for. Some ran, some are hiding, and whoever that radio operator was calling before I took him down may have brought additional fighters." A short pause. "How do you want to play it?" She looked at the valley, the shelf, the approach routes, the terrain she had spent the last hour learning from the inside out. "I'll take you out the same way I brought you in," she said. "One step at a time. But Talon led. I need you to move fast. I'm running low on ammunition, and I've got 4 dead fighters on my approach route, and I need to be off this peak before their friends come looking." Cross's answer was immediate. "We move in 60 seconds. Overwatch you call it, we follow it. Whatever you need." Whatever you need. She thought about the briefing room. The quiet corner where she had sat while Mercer made his position clear for everyone in earshot. The way the room had not pushed back. The way Cross had caught her eye for half a second, and she had not known yet what that half-second meant. She knew now. She adjusted her scope. She found the valley floor. She began calling the team home. The withdrawal took 22 minutes. 22 minutes of Claire talking a 16-man SEAL team through a valley that had been a kill box an hour ago, and was now something more complicated. Not safe, but survivable, with the right eyes and the right voice in the right earpiece at exactly the right moment. She called out every position, every shadow she couldn't confirm, every section of ground that required them to move faster or hold or redirect. She caught 2 surviving fighters on the valley floor, contact 28 and 29, who had gone to ground after the initial engagement and were waiting for the SEALs to pass through. She caught them before they could engage. She caught a third on the North Pass runner who had looped back 29 shots total, who had decided to make one more attempt. He made it. She stopped it. Shot 30. 30 shots. 29 confirmed enemy combatants eliminated or stopped. 3 additional fighters who attempted to re-engage during the withdrawal and did not succeed. And the entire time through all of it, she held that peak position, even as the cold worked deeper into her hands, and the shoulder ache turned into something harder, and the ammunition count in her mind ticked toward a number she did not want to say out loud. When the last SEAL cleared the south end of the valley, she heard Cross on the radio. "All elements are clear. All elements are clear. We are out." She lowered her eye from the scope. She looked at her hands. The right one was trembling slightly, not from fear from the sustained muscular tension of holding the rifle for over an hour in sub-zero wind at altitude. She closed it into a fist, opened it, closed it again. Maya's voice came in on their private channel. "I've got the extraction coordinates. 40 minutes of movement to the pickup zone. Can you make it? Could she make it?" She thought about every person who had ever sat across from her and wondered out loud or in private whether she belonged in a room like the one she had just owned for the last 90 minutes. "Yeah," she said. She picked up the rifle. She started down the mountain. Behind her, the peak was silent. Below her, 16 men were alive who should not have been, and somewhere between those 2 facts, in the space where doubt had once tried to live there, was nothing left but the long walk down and the cold wind and the particular kind of quiet that only existed at altitude after everything had been decided, and the only thing left to do was carry it home. She was 300 meters below the peak when her left leg gave out. Not completely. Not a collapse. Just a sudden sharp failure of the knee joint that had taken a hard impact against the rock face during the final push up the open section, an impact she had catalogued and set aside because the mission required her to set it aside, and which was now informing her in very direct terms that it was done, being set aside. She caught herself on a rock shelf, took the weight on her right side, pressed her back against the stone, and breathed through the pain for exactly 10 seconds. Then she kept moving. Maya was waiting 200 meters below back at the primary overwatch position, already broken down and packed up and ready to move. The extraction point was 40 minutes away under normal movement conditions. Claire recalculated for the knee 55 minutes, possibly 60. They did not have 60 minutes. Because the radio traffic coming off the enemy frequency, which Maya had been monitoring since the engagement started, was telling a different story than 30 silent fighters on a mountainside. The story it was telling was reinforcements. Somewhere north of the valley, a second element had been activated. Not the scouts, not the ambush force, something larger. Something that had been waiting for the outcome of the ambush, and was now moving because the outcome was not what they had planned for. Maya said it plainly when Claire reached her position. "We've got company coming. I don't know how many, and I don't know how close, but the traffic pattern changed about 12 minutes ago. Multiple transmissions close intervals, the kind of rhythm you get when a unit is moving and checking positions. Claire took the information the way she took all information in the field, without visible reaction, straight into the calculation. Direction: north-northeast, moving toward the extraction corridor. They're trying to cut off the pickup zone. That's what it sounds like. Claire looked at Maya. Maya looked back. Neither of them said what they were both thinking, because saying it would not change it, and there was no time for things that didn't change the situation. Let's move, Claire said. Your knee is not relevant. Let's move. Maya didn't argue. She picked up her pack and her spotting scope and fell in beside Claire, and they moved south along the ridge at the best pace Claire's knee would allow, which was faster than it should have been and slower than she wanted it to be, and she did not complain about either fact. In her earpiece, she could hear Cross coordinating the SEAL team's withdrawal. They were making good time on the valley floor. The southern exit had been cleared by her final engagements, and without the organized ambush force directing fire, the remaining threat was scattered and reactive rather than controlled. Cross was handling it. His team was handling it. But they were converging toward the same extraction corridor. All 18 of them, 16 SEALs and 2 snipers moving toward a pickup zone that an unknown enemy element was racing to reach first. She keyed Cross's channel. Talon led Overwatch. We have a problem. So, Cross listened to her assessment without interrupting. That was something she had noticed about him in the briefing, and had confirmed over the last 2 hours of radio contact. He was a man who believed that the person delivering information deserved to finish delivering it before he started responding. It was a rarer quality than it should have been. When she finished, he was quiet for 4 seconds. How confident are you on the direction? Maya's been on that frequency for 90 minutes. She's confident. Maya. He addressed the spotter directly. Your read? Maya's voice was steady. They're moving to cut the corridor. I'd put it at 85%. The transmission pattern is consistent with a flanking movement, and the timing starting right when the ambush went quiet tells me this was a contingency plan. If the ambush succeeded, they hold. If it failed, they move. Which means they knew about both the mission and the backup extraction point, Cross said. Which means the leak is deep, Claire said. Another silence. How much time do we have before they reach the corridor? Maya checked her calculation. 20 minutes, maybe 25. And the extraction bird is 30 minutes out. It wasn't a question. It was Cross doing the same math they were doing, arriving at the same answer, a window that did not close cleanly, a race between an enemy force and a helicopter that neither side could fully control. Options, Cross said. We can request the bird push the timeline up. Already requested. Weather is their limiting factor, not willingness. They're moving as fast as they can. Then we secure the corridor ourselves before the second element arrives. Another beat. Define we, Cross said. Claire looked at the terrain ahead of her. The corridor was a natural funnel, a gap between 2 ridgelines that provided the only viable landing zone within their operational area. The gap had good approaches and better exits, and whoever controlled the high ground on the eastern side of it controlled the corridor. From the eastern high ground, with her remaining ammunition, she could cover the entire approach and hold the corridor long enough for the helicopter to arrive. She had 6 rounds left. She didn't tell Cross that part yet. Overwatch takes the eastern high ground, she said. We secure the approach. You bring your team in from the south and hold the perimeter. When the bird arrives, you load first, then we come off the high ground and we're the last ones on. How many rounds do you have left? She told him the truth. 6. The radio was silent for what felt much longer than it was. Then Mercer's voice came in on the channel. Not angry, not contemptuous. Something she had never heard from him before, stripped down direct and entirely without its usual edge. Commander, I'll go to the high ground with her. Everyone on the channel heard it. Nobody said anything. Cross's voice careful and even. Say again, Mercer. I said I'll go to the high ground with Overwatch. A pause, then lower. She's been carrying this alone for 2 hours. 6 rounds isn't enough. Let me go. Claire opened her mouth and closed it. She had not expected that. She was not entirely sure what to do with it. Cross made the call. Mercer, Donovan. High ground eastern approach. Rest of the team on me southern perimeter. Move in the next 3 minutes or we lose the window. Descent. Mercer reached her position on the ridge at a dead run. He was carrying extra ammunition, not for her rifle. They were different calibers, but he had a suppressed carbine and the kind of intimate familiarity with it that came from years of use under real conditions. And for the range they were working at, it was more than adequate. He arrived breathing hard. He dropped into position beside her without ceremony. He looked at the approach corridor below them and spent 30 seconds reading it, the way a trained operator read terrain, quickly thoroughly translating what he saw into threat assessment and field of fire. Then he looked at her. Up close in the thin light of early morning, Ryan Mercer looked like a man who was carrying something he had been carrying for a long time and was very tired of the weight. "I owe you an apology," he said. She kept her eye on the corridor below. "Later," she said. "I need to say it now, in case later doesn't happen." She looked at him, just for a moment. His face was difficult to read. Not because it was closed, because it was too open. Because whatever armor he normally wore over the thing that had happened to his brother, and the anger it had turned into, was not on him right now. She was looking at the actual person underneath it. "You don't owe me words," she said. "You owe the mission. Pay it down there." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded. Once. And turned back to the corridor. "How do you want to work this?" "I've got 6 rounds for precision work at distance. You handle anything that gets inside 200 meters. "Understood." "And Mercer." "Yeah. Don't be a hero. Stay behind cover and call your shots. I don't need to be extracting a wounded SEAL on top of everything else." Something moved through his expression. Not quite a smile. Something more complicated than a smile. "Yes, Sergeant," he said. They went to work. The second element arrived in 14 minutes. Not 20, not 25, 14. Which meant they were closer when the monitoring started, or they were moving faster than Maya had assessed, or both. Either way, the first fighters appeared at the northern end of the approach corridor at a time that was not in the plan, and Claire had to make a split-second recalculation of everything she had laid out in her head. 14 fighters. She counted them as they emerged and moved into the corridor, and 14 was a number that changed the geometry significantly. 14 against 6 rifle rounds and 1 carbine was not a math problem with a comfortable solution. She didn't share that thought with Mercer. She keyed cross instead. Talon led. Second element is in the corridor. 14 contacts, earlier than estimated. Bird is 22 minutes out. 22 minutes, 14 fighters, 6 rounds. She put her eye to the scope. The second element was moving with coordination, spread formation covering each other's movement, using the terrain effectively. These were not militia. These were not poorly trained fighters using positioning and numbers to compensate for individual skill. These were trained soldiers, moving like trained soldiers, and they were heading directly toward the corridor that the extraction helicopter needed to use. She found the lead element. There were 2 fighters walking 0.30 meters ahead of the main body. Taking the point position was smart. It was also the most dangerous job in the formation. And it was the job she addressed first. Shot 31. The formation stopped moving, which was the correct tactical response to unexpected fire stop assess, find the threat. But stopping in an open corridor against a sniper in an elevated position was also exactly the wrong response, and it was a problem she was going to use. She found the second point man before he could break for cover. Shot 32. The formation broke. 12 fighters scattering to available cover positions, which in this corridor meant the boulder field on the left side and the shallow draw on the right side. She tracked them as they moved and logged positions. 12 fighters in cover. 4 rounds left. She talked into the radio without moving her eye from the scope. "Mercer, left side boulder field. I count 7 fighters in cover. The draw on the right has 5. The draw is your side. I've got them, Mercer said. He was already repositioning along the ridge to get a better angle on the right draw. Don't engage until I tell you. I need to coordinate this. Copy. She thought about what she was looking at. 12 fighters in cover spread across 2 positions. 4 rounds. A helicopter 20 minutes away. A SEAL team coming up from the south that needed that corridor clear, and that needed it clear before it got here, or the extraction turned into something much worse than a delayed pickup. She needed to make 4 rounds do the work of 12. That was a different kind of math. Not distance calculation or wind drift or target movement. This was the math of psychological disruption, the principle that a force in cover that believed it was under fire from multiple positions would not move, could not coordinate, and would not stage a coherent offensive action while it was trying to figure out where the shots were coming from and how many shooters it was facing. She needed them to think there were more of her. She needed them to think the high ground was saturated with shooters. She needed them to stay exactly where they were for 20 minutes. Mercer, she said, change of plan. When I shoot, I want you shooting too. Short bursts. Keep it irregular. Different intervals. I want them hearing fire from multiple positions up here. He got it immediately. Make them think we're a full Overwatch element. Yes, and if they believe that they won't move, they'll hold in cover and wait for a line of retreat, and we'll hold them right there until the bird arrives. A short pause. What if they call our bluff? Then we deal with it, she said. But trained fighters in an exposed corridor taking fire from elevated positions they can't identify will not move aggressively. Not without a commander pushing them. And their command element is at the back of the formation. The back of the formation is in the draw. Yes. Which is my side. Yes. Another beat. You want me to take the command element. I want you to make it very hard for the command element to command. She could feel him thinking through it. She could almost hear the specific sound of a very good operator who had spent years trusting his own judgment, learning in real time to trust someone else's. All right, he said. Give me your signal. When I fire, you fire. Keep it going. Don't let them hear silence up here. Understood. She found a target in the left boulder field. She breathed. She fired. Shot 33. Mercer's carbine opened up a half-second later, not on her target on the draw. Short, precise bursts spaced 3 seconds apart. Exactly the kind of fire pattern that sounded like a shooter who was disciplined and had plenty of ammunition and was under no pressure whatsoever. It was an illusion built out of 6 rounds and 1 carbine and 2 people who understood what they were doing. But it worked. Guide. The enemy did not move. For 6 minutes, the 12 surviving fighters held in their cover positions. She could see some of them through gaps in the boulders, faces down, bodies tight, the specific posture of people who had decided that the ground they were lying on was safer than anywhere they could reach by moving. Mercer kept his fire pattern going, measured unhurried, the sound of a team in control. Cross's voice on the channel was steady. Overwatch. Sit rep. Holding them in the corridor. 12 contacts pinned. Extraction window is still viable if the bird maintains timeline. Bird is 18 minutes. Copy. Mercer fired 2 more bursts. She let the shots space out longer intervals now because a team that was confident let the interval stretch, and she needed the fighters in that corridor to read confidence from everything they heard. Then one of the fighters in the boulder field made a decision. She saw it happening before it fully developed, the specific shift in body position that preceded someone breaking cover, the weight transfer, the head coming up to assess. She tracked it. He broke left, running hard for a deeper position that would give him a better angle on the ridge. Shot 34. He did not reach the deeper position. The remaining 11 held, but she had 3 rounds left. 3 rounds and 17 minutes. She was very aware of the math. Mercer was aware of it too, though he did not know her exact count. He felt the change in her fire rhythm, fewer shots from her position, longer spacing, and he adjusted by increasing his own fire tempo, slightly filling the gap, maintaining the illusion of a full team. She would think about that later. The specific sophistication of a man who had spent years being the most capable person in any room suddenly applying that capability to supporting someone else's operation. It was not nothing. It was actually a great deal. But she did not think about it now. She was counting minutes and managing 3 rounds and watching 11 fighters in the corridor with everything she had. 14 minutes. One of the fighters in the draw called out. She couldn't hear the words at this distance, but she could hear the tone, the kind of urgent command voice that was trying to rally people who did not want to be rallied right now. Mercer put 2 rounds into the draw very close to where the voice was coming from. The voice stopped. "Nice shot," Claire said quietly. "I had a good angle," Mercer said. And then after a moment, "You want to tell me how many rounds you've got left?" She considered not telling him. She told him. 3. A silence that lasted exactly as long as it needed to last, and not a second longer. "Okay," Mercer said. That was it. Just okay. Because the situation was what it was, and he was going to work with it the way a professional worked with what the situation gave him. She noted that too, filed it away in the same place she filed all the things about people that mattered. 12 minutes. Maya's voice came in from below. She had moved to a position covering the southern approach and had eyes on Cross's team. Talon lead element is in position on the south perimeter. All 16 accounted for. "Copy," Claire said. "Claire." Maya's voice shifted slightly. "You need to know something." "Talk." The radio traffic on the enemy frequency just changed again. The second element, the 14 fighters, somebody was calling their position into a higher command element. "I've been tracking the transmission, and the response that came back..." She paused. "Maya," Claire said. "The coordinates they transmitted," Maya said carefully. "They're not the corridor. They're not the valley. They're our extraction point. Someone gave them our extraction point." The cold that went through Claire had nothing to do with the mountain air. She processed it fast, not because she wanted to rush through what it meant, but because the clock was running and she needed to act on it before she felt it. "Cross," she said immediately. "Overwatch, change of extraction protocol. Our pickup coordinates have been compromised. I need an alternate LZ." A beat of silence on Cross's end. Then, "How?" "Same way the ambush knew where we were going. Same channel, same source." She could hear it land. She could hear the weight of it settle over the radio. 16 SEALs in a valley with a compromised extraction point and an enemy element 12 minutes away from the position they now knew was where the helicopter was going to land. Cross's voice was steady. That steadiness was a form of discipline she respected enormously. "Stand by." He was talking to someone on a separate channel. "Command. The extraction bird. Someone who could authorize a change fast enough to matter." Mercer's voice quiet on their local channel. "If the LZ is compromised." "I know." The bird comes in hot and... "I know, Mercer." "What's the play?" She looked at the corridor. 11 fighters still holding. 3 rounds left. 10 minutes on the bird. "The play is we hold this corridor for 10 more minutes regardless of where the bird lands," she said. "If these 11 fighters break out of here, they can reach any alternate LZ we pick in the same time the bird can, so we keep them here. With 3 rounds. And your carbine. I've got maybe 40 rounds left." "Then we're fine," she said. And she meant it exactly the way she said it, not as bravado, not as performance, but as a functional assessment of what 40 rounds and 3 precision shots could accomplish in this corridor for 10 minutes if the people using them knew what they were doing. And they knew what they were doing. Cross came back on the main channel. "Alternate LZ authorized. 2 kilometers southeast. Bird is rerouting. New ETA is 14 minutes. 14 minutes, not 10. She absorbed the 4 additional minutes. "Copy," she said. "Overwatch will hold the corridor. Get your team to the alternate LZ. We can't leave you." "You're not leaving us. You're positioning your team at the extraction point, so when the bird arrives, you can load and go. Mercer and I will disengage from the corridor, and move to your position when the second element is no longer a threat. Define no longer a threat. She looked at the 11 fighters in the corridor. She looked at Mercer. She looked at the 3 rounds in her rifle and the 40 in his carbine and the 14 minutes on the clock. "We'll handle the definition," she said. "Move your team." A pause that was almost long enough to be something other than tactical. "Claire." Cross's voice dropped the rank structure entirely. Just 2 words said like he meant them. "Come back." She did not answer that. She turned to Mercer. "You ready?" He met her eyes, and she saw something in his face that she had never expected to see there. Not respect exactly, though it was that too. Something closer to recognition. The look of a person who had spent years seeing things a certain way and was standing at the exact moment when the certainty cracked and what was underneath it was better than what he had built on top. "Tell me what you need," he said. What she needed was a controlled disengagement. 11 fighters in cover waiting for an opportunity to move. She needed to keep them waiting. Keep them uncertain. Keep them from understanding that the 2-person element on the ridge above them was about to stop shooting and start running, because the moment they understood the fire had stopped. Really stopped, not paused. They would move. And moving 11 fighters toward an alternate extraction point 14 minutes away was exactly what this conversation was about preventing. She explained it to Mercer in 40 seconds. He listened the same way Cross listened all the way through. "So we break contact in stages," he said. "One of us fires, then moves. The other covers the move. We leapfrog back along the ridge." "Exactly. Standard stuff." "Standard stuff with 3 rounds on the precision side." "Right." He thought for a moment. "Use them at the end. Not now. Now I can carry the fire. Save your rounds for anything that breaks from cover and gets within range of the alternate LZ." She looked at him. It was a good plan. It was objectively a better evolution of the plan than what she had been constructing in her own head, because he had correctly identified the highest value use of her remaining ammunition and had built the movement concept around protecting that use. "Agreed," she said. "You move first. I'll cover." "Mercer." "Your knee," he said simply. Not a concession. A calculation. "You move at a pace I can cover. I move at a pace that doesn't need covering." She held his gaze for a moment. She did not say thank you. She moved. The next 8 minutes were the most physically demanding of her career. Not because of the knee, though the knee was a problem she was going to be dealing with for a long time after this mountain, but because she was moving along a ridge under potential observation, with 3 rounds in her rifle and a timeline that kept compressing, and the specific kind of exhaustion that lived in the body after 90 minutes of sustained high-altitude engagement, the kind of exhaustion that was deeper than muscle and closer to something structural. She moved anyway. Mercer covered her in short bursts, keeping the fiction alive, keeping the 11 fighters uncertain. She reached each successive position, got stable, called him forward. He moved fast and low. She covered his movement, reading the corridor below, watching for the moment when one of those fighters decided the fire had changed quality. It took them 7 minutes to break contact cleanly. The fighters in the corridor held for 6 of those 7 minutes. On the 7th minute, 2 of them broke from the boulder field. She used round 35 on the first one. The second one dropped back into cover. Round 36 she held. Mercer put fire into the boulder field, not aimed suppressive enough to confirm the ridge was still occupied and still dangerous. They held. She and Mercer kept moving. When they cleared the ridge and dropped below the line of sight of the corridor, she exhaled something she had been holding for 7 minutes. "Contact behind," Mercer asked. She checked, listened. No movement on the ridge above them. The fighters in the corridor were still in their cover positions, still reading the ridge as occupied. "We're clear," she said. "LZ is south-southeast. 12 minutes." Her knee sent a very specific message to her brain. She told her brain to put it in the same folder as everything else she wasn't dealing with right now. "Let's go," she said. They moved together down the slope in the gray light of early morning, and it was a strange thing running alongside the man who had said she did not belong, who had spent the last 2 hours proving she did, who had spent the last 8 minutes covering her movement with the same precision and commitment he would have given any operator he trusted. She did not know yet what to make of Ryan Mercer. She did not have to make anything of him right now. Right now she had 2 rounds left and 12 minutes, and Maya's voice in her earpiece saying, "I'm at the LZ, the team is here. The bird is 11 minutes out." And the sound of Mercer's footfalls on the rock beside her, steady and reliable, exactly as fast as she was moving, and not a step faster. They ran. Below them, the extraction zone was waiting. Above them, the corridor was holding. And somewhere in a secure communications channel, deep in the operations architecture, a transmission had been sent to enemy fighters with coordinates that were supposed to be classified. A transmission that nobody on this mountain had yet had time to trace back to its source. But the source existed, and it had been talking all night. And when the right people found it, everything they thought they understood about how this mission almost became a disaster was going to rewrite itself into something much darker than a failed ambush. That reckoning was coming. But first, they had to make the bird. They heard the helicopter before they saw it. That distant rhythmic thud that every soldier learned to love the way a drowning person loved a rope. Not with elegance, not with gratitude, just with the raw animal relief of something that meant you were not going to die here after all. Claire heard it and kept running. Her knee had stopped sending warning signals 20 minutes ago and had moved into a different register entirely, a deep grinding wrongness that she was processing as information rather than pain, the way her body had learned to process everything in the field. She logged it. She moved through it. She ran. Mercer was 2 steps to her left and had been there the entire descent without comment, not hovering, not helping in a way that implied she needed help, just present, moving at her pace, covering her flank without making it a production. She noticed. She filed it. The LZ came into view, a flat clearing between 2 ridgelines, where Maya was already positioned with Cross's team arrayed in a defensive perimeter around it. 16 SEALs, weapons out, covering every approach. They had set up fast and clean. The team had not needed instructions to do it right. Cross saw her coming and broke from the perimeter. He moved toward her at a controlled jog, not running, which would have communicated panic to the team, and he closed the distance in 10 seconds and looked at her with the specific expression of a man who had spent the last 14 minutes not knowing. "You're here," he said. "We're here," she said. He looked at Mercer. Mercer looked back. Something passed between them. Not forgiveness, because that was too large a word for 14 minutes on a mountainside, but something in the same general direction. "Contacts?" Cross asked. "Corridor is still holding them," Mercer said. "They're going to figure it out in the next few minutes. We need to be in the air." "Bird is 90 seconds out." Maya materialized at Claire's elbow. "Knee," she said quietly. "Functional. That's not what I asked." "It's what I've got." Maya looked at her for a moment, the way a person looked at someone they'd known long enough to know when not to push. "Okay," she said, and handed Claire 3 additional rifle rounds she had been carrying in her kit since the beginning of the operation, because Maya knew her partner and knew that ammunition was a resource that ran out at the worst moments. Claire took them without a word. Loaded 2, held the 3rd. 36 shots fired, 2 remaining plus 1 in reserve. Mission still open. She turned to face the northern approach. The helicopter was 45 seconds out, and something was moving on the northern ridge. She saw it before anyone else did. That was not ego. That was the product of 90 minutes at a scope calibrating her eyes to the specific quality of movement in this terrain at this light level. The way a human shape disturbed the negative space between rocks, differently than wind, differently than animal movement, differently than shadows shifting with the early sun. 2 shapes, then 3. The fighters from the corridor had worked it out faster than she had given them credit for. "Cross," she said. He was already looking where she was looking. "I see them. Northern ridge, 3 contacts at least. moving toward the LZ. She did not have to tell him what that meant. 3 fighters on the northern ridge with 30 seconds until a helicopter arrived at the LZ meant that the helicopter was about to come in under fire. And a helicopter coming in under fire was a helicopter that might not land. And a helicopter that did not land was something none of them could afford right now. Cross keyed his radio. Overwatch aboard approach. Say again aboard approach. We have contacts on the northern ridge. The helicopter pilot's voice came back flat and professional. Talon, we are 2 minutes of fuel above bingo. We land or we turn for home. Your call. 2 minutes of fuel above bingo meant the helicopter had exactly enough fuel to land load and return to base with a 2-minute margin. It did not have enough fuel to orbit and wait. It did not have enough fuel for a second approach window. This was the only window. Cross looked at Claire. She had already raised the rifle. 2 rounds. 3 contacts on the northern ridge at approximately 400 meters moving fast, angling toward a firing position that would put the LZ inside their effective range in the next 45 seconds. She could not take all 3. She could not miss. She found the lead contact. She exhaled everything she had. Shot 37. He went down. The remaining 2 contacts split, 1 broke left, 1 broke right, exactly what she had predicted and exactly what she had planned for. She tracked the left contact because he was the faster mover, and the faster mover reached the firing position first. Shot 38. The right contact hit the ground in a prone firing position and opened up. Rounds came in hot and close. Not accurate, not the work of someone who had zeroed his weapon to this range, but close enough that every SEAL on the perimeter dropped a half step lower, and the helicopter pilot, who was on approach and watching his instruments, and not the ridge, felt the acoustic concussion of rounds passing near the fuselage and made a decision in about half a second. "Taking fire," the pilot said. His voice had exactly 0 emotion in it. Still on approach. She heard that and felt something she did not have a name for. The specific courage of someone in a machine who had the option to abort and chose not to because the people on the ground were out of options. She had 1 round left. The contact on the northern ridge was in a prone position behind a rock, intermittently shifting to fire and dropping back. She could not get a clean shot on him without waiting for the shift, and the shift was unpredictable. 3 seconds, 5 seconds, 2 seconds. No pattern. He was good enough to break his own rhythm. The helicopter was 15 seconds from touchdown. She held on his last known position. She waited. Cross was talking on the radio, coordinating covering fire from the perimeter. 3 SEALs on the northern side of the LZ opened up suppressive, keeping the contact's head down. It was working. It was keeping him from accurate fire, but suppressive fire from the LZ created its own problem, because now there were rounds going north, and the helicopter was coming in from the northwest, and the geometry was getting complicated. "Ceasefire north," Cross called. "Bird on final approach. Ceasefire." The SEAL stopped. The contact on the ridge shifted to fire again. She was already on him. Shot 39. The ridge went quiet. 12 seconds later, the helicopter touched down so hard the landing gear flexed, and the crew chief was already out with the door open before the skids fully settled, his arm going in a wide, urgent circle that needed no translation. Move, move, move. The loading took 41 seconds. She had seen fast helicopter loads before. She had participated in fast helicopter loads before. She had never seen 16 combat-loaded SEALs plus 2 additional personnel move from a defensive perimeter into an aircraft in 41 seconds without anyone getting tangled, without anyone losing equipment, without the kind of confusion that happened when adrenaline and urgency collided with a confined space and too many bodies. They moved like what they were the best-trained warriors in the American military, doing something they had rehearsed 10,000 times and were now doing for real. Cross went last. That was leadership. He stood at the door and counted every person onto the aircraft by hand, and did not step in until his count was complete. Claire went in before him, Maya right behind her, Mercer was already seated, his carbine across his knees, looking out the opposite window at the northern ridge, with an expression that had not fully settled yet into anything she could read. Cross stepped in. "Go," he told the pilot. The helicopter lifted hard and fast, not a smooth ascent, but the kind of aggressive departure that happened when a pilot wanted maximum altitude and maximum distance from the ground in minimum time, and the physics of the aircraft cooperated, because the pilot had been doing this long enough to know exactly what the machine would give him. The LZ dropped away below them. For a moment, nobody spoke. 18 people in an aircraft that smelled like fuel and gun oil, and the specific smell of people who had been operating at high intensity, in cold mountain air for hours, the smell of the work, the smell of what the night had cost. Then Danny Cho, seated 3 spots down from Mercer, said very quietly into the silence, "Are we all here?" Cross answered from the back. "We're all here." Cho nodded once and looked back out the window, and that was it. That was the debrief that happened at 30 feet of altitude, with rotor wash filling every gap in the conversation. 18 lives. All present. All accounted for. The arithmetic of the night completing itself with no remainder. Claire leaned her head back against the bulkhead. She allowed herself 10 seconds. Just 10. Then she started reviewing everything she had done from the first shot to the last, because the operation was not actually over. The operation would not be over until the debrief, and the debrief would not close until the leak was identified, and the leak had been talking to enemy forces all night with information that should have been locked inside the smallest possible circle of people. She started building the list. Fort Sentinel materialized below them 58 minutes later. The medical team was waiting on the flight line. Protocol: any mission returning from a live engagement got a medical assessment before anything else. Claire stepped off the aircraft and walked directly toward the medical team and was immediately intercepted by a flight surgeon who took one look at her gait and said, "The knee. Which one?" "Left," she said. He put a hand on her arm and redirected her without discussion. She let him, because the knee had become, in the last 20 minutes of flight, something that she could no longer entirely manage through discipline, and she was done pretending otherwise now that the mountain was behind her. Mercer passed her on the way to the medical station. He was walking normally, no visible injuries, though she knew he was carrying something in his right shoulder that he had not mentioned during the operation. A previous injury she had noticed in the way he adjusted his grip during the ridge movement and said nothing about. He slowed when he reached her, looked at the knee, looked at her, said nothing, because there was nothing useful to say. Then he said, "Thank you." She looked at him. "For what specifically?" "For doing your job," he said. "Even when I made it harder." She held his gaze for a moment. The flight line was busy around them. Medical personnel, logistics crews, debriefing officers forming up in clusters, the organized noise of a base receiving an operation back from the field. "Your job made it possible," she said. "On that ridge. What you did with the carbine, that was good work." Something shifted in his face. Not relief exactly. More like the specific sensation of a knot loosening that had been tied for years. "I'm going to need some time to work through some things," he said. "I know. I don't expect you to make that easy." "I'm not going to make it hard," she said. "But I'm also not going to pretend the last 6 years didn't happen." He nodded. That was fair. He knew it was fair. "I'll be at the debrief," he said, and walked on. She watched him go. Maya appeared at her shoulder. "That looked almost like a human moment," Maya said. "Don't push it," Claire said. Maya smiled, just slightly. "Come on, they want to look at that knee." Colonel Whitmore was waiting at the medical station. He was not a man who waited places. He had staff for waiting. He was a man who arrived, assessed, decided, and moved. The fact that he was standing outside the medical station when Claire arrived told her something significant. "Sergeant Donovan," he said. "Colonel, Sit down before you fall down. She sat. He pulled a chair close and sat across from her while the flight surgeon worked on her knee. His expression was difficult to read in the specific way that very experienced commanders were difficult to read, not because it was empty, but because it contained too many things at once. "The mission is secure," he said. "The objective was achieved." "I know, sir. You put 39 rounds downrange, 30 confirmed eliminations. You held 2 separate enemy elements and cleared an extraction corridor with 6 rounds and 1 carbine. Mercer ran the carbine." "I know who ran the carbine." He paused. "What happened up there between the two of you?" "Is done," she said. "It's finished. He did his job, and I did mine." Whitmore looked at her for a long moment. "You're not going to make a complaint?" "No, sir." "You have cause. I have a mission that succeeded. That's what I have." He was quiet for a moment. The flight surgeon said something about ligament strain and ice and rest, and she absorbed it as information and set it aside. "We have a problem," Whitmore said. His voice changed. Not louder, lower. She had been waiting for this. "The leak," she said. "The leak." He confirmed it with 2 words the way a heavy door confirmed that it was closed. Final. Complete. The extraction coordinates were transmitted to enemy command 40 minutes before the mission even reached the valley. Not during. Before. She sat with that for a moment. Before the ambush triggered. Before. Which means whoever transmitted them knew the timeline well enough to time the enemy reinforcement element for the end of the mission rather than the beginning. They weren't trying to prevent the mission. They were trying to make sure nobody came back from it. The distinction was significant. She turned it over. If the intent had been to stop the mission, the information would have been transmitted to the ambush force in time to interdict before the SEALs entered the valley. But that's not what happened. The ambush was designed to kill the team in the valley. The reinforcement element was designed to close the escape routes and finish anyone who survived. This was not intelligence provided to an adversary. This was a coordinated assassination plan for 16 American Special Operations soldiers. "Who had the extraction coordinates?" she asked. "That's the list we're building right now. It's short. Very short." "How short?" 12 people, Whitmore said, "including everyone in that briefing room last night." She thought about the briefing room, the table, the positions, the specific people in their specific chairs. She thought about Ryan Mercer, who had been angry enough about this mission to say things out loud that most people kept private. Who had fought Cross's decision to trust her judgment at 2 separate points in the operation. Who had lost a brother and blamed a woman for it and built an entire belief system around that loss. She thought about all of that, and then she thought about the last 8 minutes on the ridge, when that same man had covered her movement with 40 rounds and perfect discipline, had adapted to her plan, had identified the highest value use of her remaining ammunition, and built a tactic around protecting it. She thought about him saying, "Thank you," on the flight line, and meaning it. "What are you thinking?" Whitmore said. "I'm thinking about who was in that room," she said. "And I'm thinking about what each person had to gain from this mission failing. And I'm thinking the answer isn't who was the angriest. Anger isn't a motive for this. This was calculated. This was patient. This was someone who wanted it to look like a mission failure rather than an assassination." Whitmore leaned forward slightly. "Keep going." The ambush was sophisticated. The pre-positioning on the west faced the secondary reinforcement element with the alternate LZ coordinates. That level of coordination required time and resources. Somebody didn't decide to leak this last night. They've been in contact with this enemy element for a while. This wasn't reactive. This was planned. Which means we're looking for someone who knew this operation was coming before the briefing. The briefing confirmed details. The relationship existed before the details. Whitmore was very still. She looked at him. "Colonel, who requested this mission?" A silence opened up in the space between them. Heavy. Full of something. "The request came from up the chain," Whitmore said carefully. "As all requests do." Who specifically signed the authorization? He looked at her for a long moment. That, he said, is the question the investigative unit is going to be asking starting in about 4 hours. She nodded. He stood. Get that knee treated. Sleep. You'll be in the debrief at 1400. He walked 3 steps and stopped. Without turning around, he said, You should know I've been in this business 28 years. What you did on that mountain tonight is going to be discussed in rooms I can't name for a very long time. She didn't answer. He walked on. She looked at her hands. 39 shots. Not one wasted. Not one fired from anger or fear or anything except the cold, clear discipline of a woman who knew her job at a level that the people who had doubted her would spend years privately revising their understanding of. The flight surgeon wrapped her knee and told her to stay off it. She thanked him. She stayed off it for exactly as long as it took him to turn around. The debrief started at 1400 and ran for 3 hours. 18 people in a secure room walking through the operation in the structured, methodical way that the military conducted post-action reviews, sequence by sequence, decision by decision, outcome by outcome. Claire answered every question with the same economy she brought to everything: direct, complete, nothing extra. Cross ran the debrief. He was good at it. The same quality of listening that marked his radio communications was present here, an attention that made the person speaking feel that what they were saying was actually being processed, rather than just transcribed. When they reached the section covering the initial contact assessment, the moment when she had identified the west face ambush and Cross had trusted her over Mercer's objection, Mercer spoke. He did not wait to be asked. I want to address something, he said. On the record. The room went quiet in a way that was different from its previous quiet. I objected to Sergeant Donovan's assessment at the critical moment before the mission. I framed my objection in a way that was unprofessional and that was based on bias rather than on the operational information in front of me. He paused. She was right. I was wrong. The mission almost failed not because of anything she did, but because I spent time undermining the assessment of the most capable asset on the operation. He said it looking straight ahead. Not at Claire, not at Cross. At the space in front of him where the words needed to land. That's on the record, he said. I'm done. The room was silent for 3 full seconds. Cross nodded once. The debrief continued. After the session, when the room was clearing and people were moving toward doors in the organic way of individuals processing a long and difficult experience, Danny Cho stopped beside Claire's chair. Cho was a quiet man. She had not heard much from him during the operation or the debrief. He had the quality of someone who gathered information carefully and spent it sparingly. I've been in this unit for 6 years, Cho said. I've never heard Mercer say anything like that, about anyone. She looked at him. Is that right? She said. He lost his brother on a mission. You probably know that. I know it. He blamed a female intel officer for the information failure, built a wall out of it. Cho paused. The wall just came down a little. A little, she said. Walls that big don't come down all at once? No, she agreed. They don't. Cho nodded, moved toward the door, then stopped, turned back. For what it's worth, he said. Every person in that room today knows exactly what kept us alive last night, and it's going to be very hard to unknow that. He left. She sat with that for a moment. The room was empty now, except for her and Maya, who was leaning against the far wall, watching her with the easy patience of someone who had nowhere else to be. You okay? Maya said. Tired, Claire said. That's not what I asked. It's the true part of what I'm feeling right now. Maya pushed off the wall and came and sat in the chair beside her. She did not put an arm around her or make any of the gestures that a different person in a different relationship might make. She just sat there, present, which was what Maya did best. The investigative unit is going to find who leaked the coordinates, Maya said. You know that. I know. When they do, it's going to be someone in that briefing room. I know that too. Does that bother you? Claire looked at the table, the empty chairs, the whiteboard at the front of the room where the operation had been reconstructed in lines and arrows and times. "It bothers me that 16 people almost died," she said. "It bothers me that someone in this building looked at a room full of American soldiers and decided their deaths were acceptable. That's what bothers me. And the fact that it was probably someone who knew you were on the mission." She looked at Maya. "You think it's connected?" "I think the timing is curious," Maya said carefully. "A mission with a female sniper on it, a mission that a certain CWO made very clear he did not support a mission where the leak was timed to ensure maximum casualties." She paused. "I think the investigative unit is going to find something ugly." The room felt very quiet. Claire said nothing, because she had been thinking the same thing since Whitmore told her the extraction coordinates had been transmitted before the mission reached the valley. She had been thinking it and not saying it because saying it without evidence was accusation, and accusation without evidence was a different kind of weapon, one that cut the person who used it as much as the target. She waited for evidence. Evidence was coming. She could feel it, the way she could feel weather coming in the mountains, not seeing it yet, but reading all the signs that preceded it. The atmospheric pressure of a truth that was still underground, working its way toward the surface about to break. "Let the investigators do their job," Claire said. "And us, we do ours." Maya nodded. And then Claire's radio, the mission radio. She was still carrying the one that had been her connection to 16 lives for the last 6 hours, crackled once. She looked at it. It was Whitmore's frequency. His voice clipped and hard in a way she had not heard from him before. "Donovan, my office, immediately." She and Maya exchanged one look. She picked up the radio. She picked up her rifle case. She stood, and the knee told her exactly what it thought of that, and she told the knee what she thought of its opinion. And she walked toward Whitmore's office through the corridors of Fort Sentinel, where 16 hours ago she had been the woman sitting quietly in the corner of the briefing room that nobody wanted her in. The corridors were the same. The base was the same. The building was the same. But the way people looked at her as she passed was not the same, not even slightly. 2 logistics officers moved aside without being asked. A senior NCO she had never met made eye contact and gave her a nod that communicated something specific. The specific kind of acknowledgement that passed between people who understood what hard work actually looked like. She did not slow down. She did not perform anything for anyone watching. She walked the way she had always walked forward at her own pace toward whatever was next. Whitmore's door was open. She could see his face before she reached it. And what she saw there told her that whatever the investigative unit had found in the last 4 hours, it was not what anyone had expected. It was worse. Whitmore was standing when she walked in. That was the first thing she noticed. Not sitting behind his desk the way commanders sat when they were delivering news from a position of institutional authority. Standing. In the center of the room. Like a man who had received something that made sitting feel wrong. 2 other people were in the office. A woman in civilian clothes with a federal ID clipped to her jacket, investigative unit senior enough that she had not introduced herself to anyone in the corridor. And a uniformed officer Claire did not recognize, a full colonel with the specific bearing of someone who had been flown in from somewhere else and had not slept. The door closed behind her. Whitmore looked at her for a moment before he spoke. The look was not pity, not apology. It was the expression of a man who was about to hand someone a weight and needed them to be ready for it. "The transmission trace came back an hour ago," he said. She waited. The coordinates were transmitted from inside this building, from a secure terminal on the 3rd floor. Authorization credentials belonging to Chief Warrant Officer Ryan Mercer. The room was absolutely silent. She stood very still. "His credentials," she said. "His credentials," Whitmore confirmed. "Not necessarily him." The distinction landed carefully and deliberately, and she understood why he had made it. "What does the access log show?" The woman in civilian clothes answered. Her voice was precise and unhurried, the voice of someone who had been in rooms like this one many times and had learned to treat information as a substance that needed to be handled correctly. The log shows the terminal was accessed at 21:47 hours, 14 minutes before the mission briefing ended. The credential was used once. The transmission lasted 48 seconds. After that, the terminal was cleared and the session ended. Who was in the briefing room at 21:47? Everyone, Whitmore said, including Mercer. The briefing did not end until 22:01. Claire processed that. So his credentials were used while he was physically present in the briefing room. Which means either he had a device capable of remote terminal access that he operated during the briefing without anyone seeing. Unlikely given the security protocols on those terminals, the civilian woman said. Or someone used his credentials without him. Yes. Someone who had access to his authentication information. Yes. Someone who wanted him to take the fall if the trace came back. The words landed in the room like stones into still water. Whitmore nodded once. The investigative unit believes the credential theft occurred sometime in the 72 hours prior to the mission. Mercer's personal device was accessed. We found the intrusion this morning. Someone got into his authentication files, extracted his terminal credentials, and used them at the precise window when he would have the strongest alibi inside a room with 17 other people. Claire thought about Mercer on the ridge. The way he had covered her movement. The 40 rounds he had spent keeping an illusion alive for 8 minutes so she could reposition. The way he had said thank you on the flight line and meant it in the complicated way that people meant things that cost them something. She thought about him standing up in the debrief and putting his failures on the record without being asked. She thought about Danny Cho saying the wall just came down a little. He didn't know, she said. We don't believe he did, the civilian woman said. But we need to establish that definitively, which is why his situation is currently complicated. What does complicated mean? It means he's been separated from the team pending investigation. It means his access has been suspended. It means the next 24 to 72 hours are going to be very difficult for him. Claire looked at Whitmore, who actually sent the transmission. Whitmore and the civilian officer exchanged a look. One of those looks that contained a conversation that had already happened in a room Claire had not been in. We have a direction, Whitmore said carefully. I need more than a direction, Colonel. He studied her for a moment. Then he made a decision. She could see it happening, the specific internal shift of a commander choosing to extend trust past the point that protocol recommended, because the situation required it, and because the person in front of him had spent the last 18 hours earning it. Captain Derek Soames, he said. 3rd floor operations. He had authorized access to the secure terminals, and he worked a late shift 2 nights ago that put him in proximity to Mercer's workstation. We don't have confirmation yet, but the access pattern. Who is he? 15 years in, decorated. He was passed over for Major 8 months ago. Whitmore paused. He filed a formal complaint 6 months ago about the integration of female operators into special operations roles. The complaint was rejected. He filed a second complaint 4 months ago. Also rejected. The room was very quiet again. Claire heard what Whitmore was not saying directly. She heard the shape of it, a man who had watched a world he believed in change in ways he could not accept, who had filed official complaints and been told those complaints did not matter, who had then looked for a different kind of answer. He decided to prove the point himself, she said. If the mission failed, if the female sniper was on the mountain when everything went wrong, it would look like confirmation of everything he'd been saying. That's the theory, the civilian woman said. Except the mission didn't fail. No, Whitmore said. It did not. She left Whitmore's office 20 minutes later with more information than she had walked in with, and a weight that was different from the weight she had been carrying since the mountain. The knee throbbed. She ignored it. Maya was in the corridor. She had not been told to wait there. She had simply stayed because that was what Maya did, and she pushed off the wall when Claire came out and read her partner's face with the efficiency of someone who had learned to read it under much worse conditions. Mercer's being investigated, Claire said quietly. Maya's face tightened. For the leak. His credentials were used, not by him. Someone set him up. Maya processed that in about 3 seconds. Soames, you knew. I didn't know, but I've been in this building long enough to know who files the complaints and what they're about. She paused. Soames was in the briefing room. He was. He heard everything, timeline, extraction point, the whole package. Everything. They walked together down the corridor, and the silence between them was the kind that held information rather than avoided it. Mercer doesn't know yet, Claire said. What are you going to do? She had been asking herself that question since Whitmore said the word complicated. Since she had understood that a man who had spent the last 18 hours traveling from the person who undermined her to the person who covered her movement on a mountain ridge was sitting somewhere in this building right now, believing that the investigation was about him, that the evidence pointed at him, that the night he had finally started doing the right thing was the night that was going to cost him everything. She did not have a clean answer. What she had was the same thing she had always had, the clear, unambiguous conviction that the truth was the only currency worth spending. The right thing, she said. Maya looked at her sideways. That's very general. I know. In this building, the right thing sometimes takes a while to get authorization. Then I'll wait for authorization, Claire said. But I won't wait past the point where waiting becomes a different kind of wrong. Gepkog. The authorization came 4 hours later. Not from Whitmore, from the civilian investigator whose name Claire had learned was Sandra Voss, and who had spent her career building cases against people who had decided that their personal convictions entitled them to override everyone else's safety. Voss came to the room where Claire was sitting with her knee elevated and a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, and she sat across from her without preamble. We found the intrusion on Mercer's device, Voss said. Timestamp method origin point. The origin point is a workstation on the 3rd floor that Soames was logged into on the night of the intrusion. That's enough. It's enough to move to the next stage. We're bringing Soames in for questioning in the next 2 hours. She paused. I want you in the observation room. Why me? Voss looked at her steadily. Because you were on that mountain. Because you fired 39 rounds to keep 16 people alive, while someone in this building was routing enemy fighters to their extraction point. Because the case I'm building is going to go in front of people who need to understand exactly what was at stake, and you are the clearest example of it. Another pause. And because Soames has been told the investigation is focused on Mercer. I want to see his face when he realizes it isn't. Claire looked at her. You want to read, she said. I want your read. You spent the night reading people at 400 meters in the dark. I want to know what you see when he's sitting 3 feet in front of glass. She thought about it for about 4 seconds. All right, she said. She put the coffee down. She stood up. Derek Soames was 43 years old, compact, with close-cut gray hair and the kind of face that had probably been considered trustworthy for most of his career. He sat in the interview room with the practiced composure of someone who had decided how this was going to go and had arrived prepared to execute that plan. He thought this was about Mercer. She could see it immediately, the specific quality of ease in someone who believes they are safe, who has prepared their story and believes the story is good, who thinks the narrative is running exactly the way they designed it. Voss came in alone. Simple approach, unhurried. She sat across from him and put a single folder on the table, and she did not open it. Captain Soames, thank you for coming in. Of course, he said, easy, cooperative, the voice of a man helping with an investigation. I want to ask you about the night before the mission, specifically, the late shift you worked. Sure. He gave her the timeline without hesitation. What time he arrived, what terminal he worked at, what tasks he completed. Clean, consistent, rehearsed. Did you interact with Chief Warrant Officer Mercer's workstation at any point during that shift? Mercer number 1. I don't think our workstations are even on the same row. But you were in proximity to that area of the floor. At some point in the shift, sure. It's an open floor plan. Voss nodded, still unhurried, still not opening the folder. Captain, I want to ask you something different now. I want to ask you about the formal complaints you filed regarding female operator integration. The ease shifted. Not much. Not dramatically. A very slight recalibration of weight in the chair. A quality change in the eyes, still composed, but now composing harder. Those complaints are on record, he said. They're legitimate policy disagreements through official channels. Absolutely. Tell me about the second one. What specifically were you arguing? He explained. Carefully, methodically, the same arguments he had made in writing. Female operators in high-stakes roles created vulnerabilities. The data supported his position. He was not opposed to women in the military, he was opposed to placing individuals in roles they were not suited for, regardless of gender. He used the word regardless twice. In the observation room, Claire watched him use it and felt the specific cold of someone watching a person they had never met explain in measured language the belief system that had almost killed 16 people. One more question, Voss said. When the mission debriefs were compiled this morning, the after-action assessment indicated that Sergeant Donovan's Overwatch work was the primary factor in mission success. That she identified the ambush, she cleared the kill box, she held the extraction corridor. Did you read that assessment? A beat, very brief, very controlled. I was briefed on it, yes. What was your reaction? He looked at her. For the first time, the composure cracked. Not much. Not all the way. A hairline fracture across the surface of a man who had built a very specific certainty about how the world worked and had just been asked to hold it next to a fact that did not fit. I would want to review the full operational picture before drawing conclusions, he said. Of course. Voss nodded. She opened the folder. She put a single printed page on the table in front of him. She let him read it. In the observation room, Claire watched his face as he read. She watched the hairline fracture widen. She watched the composure do what composure did when the story underneath it stopped holding. Not collapse, because trained people did not collapse, but compress, tighten, lose its quality of ease, and become something harder and more brittle. He looked up from the page. He said nothing. That's the origin point for the intrusion on Mercer's device, Voss said. The timestamp is 2,318 hours on the night of your late shift. The workstation is 3 stations from Mercer's. The login credentials on that workstation are yours. Soames was very still. I want legal counsel, he said. That's your right. Voss stood, calm, unhurried, like a person who had all the time in the world, because the time had already been spent, and the outcome was already written. We'll arrange that immediately. She left the folder on the table. She walked out. Voss came into the observation room and stood beside Claire without saying anything for a long moment. They both looked through the glass at the man sitting alone at the table, looking at the page in the folder. Your read, Voss said. He believed it, Claire said. That's the thing that's hard to look at. He genuinely believed that what he was doing was right. That if the mission failed, if the female sniper was gone, and 16 SEALs were dead, it would prove his point, and the point was worth the cost. Voss was quiet. 15 years of service, she said. Decorated 3 times, and he decided that was his call to make. Ideology does that, Claire said. When someone has convinced themselves that they are protecting something, a standard, a tradition, an idea about who belongs, they stop being able to see the people in front of them as real. The 16 SEALs weren't people anymore. They were evidence in an argument. She looked through the glass one more time. He lost the argument, she said, on the mountain, in the most complete way possible. She turned away from the window. She was done looking at him. They told Mercer that evening, not in a formal meeting, not in a conference room. Whitmore brought him into his office at 1800 hours, and Claire was there and Voss was there, and they told him directly and completely what had happened to his credentials, what Soames had done, and what the investigation had found. He listened without interrupting. She watched him absorb it, the way a person absorbed something they had not seen coming, and that changed the shape of the last 24 hours retroactively. He had spent the day believing he was under investigation for treason. She could see that in the way he was sitting, the specific compression of a man who had been carrying that weight, and now the weight was being set down and replaced with something different. Not lighter. Different. When Whitmore finished, Mercer sat quietly for a moment. Then he said, "Soames?" "Yes," Whitmore said. "He used my credentials to route enemy fighters to an extraction point where 16 of my people were going to be." "Yes." A long silence. "Because he wanted the mission to fail." "The investigation supports that conclusion." Mercer looked at his hands. She thought he was going to say something about Soames. About what Soames had done, about what Soames deserved, about the specific kind of betrayal that lived inside what had been done with his name and his credentials. Instead, he looked up at Claire. "If you hadn't called the West face," he said, "if you hadn't pushed for that Overwatch position, if you hadn't climbed that peak?" "But I did," she said. "I know, I'm not doing a hypothetical." He stopped, started again. The words were coming from somewhere that he was not entirely used to accessing. "I'm trying to say that someone in this building spent months building a case for why you shouldn't be on that mountain. And the reason 16 people came home is because you were." She held his gaze. "I know what I did," she said. "I don't need it measured against what someone else tried to do. I need to say it." "Then you've said it." He nodded. "And then, after another moment, I said things in the briefing room." "You did?" "On the radio, too, when my radio was hot." "Yes." "I'm not going to ask you to—" "Mercer," she said. "Stop." He stopped. "You covered my movement on that ridge for 8 minutes with 40 rounds and perfect discipline. You identified the highest value use of my last 3 rounds and built a tactic around protecting it. You went on record in the debrief without being asked." She paused. "I don't need an apology tour. I need operators who do their jobs when it matters." He looked at her for a long moment. "Is that enough?" he said. And it was the most genuinely uncertain thing she had ever heard him say. "It's a start," she said. "A real one." That was all she gave him. It was enough. 3 days later, Claire stood in Whitmore's office for the second time that week. And this time he was sitting behind his desk, and this time the meeting had a different quality. Not crisis, not investigation, but the specific weight of official recognition, which was its own complicated thing. "Normally this would be a formal ceremony," Whitmore said. "Given the classified nature of the operation, we're keeping it small." "I understand, sir. The citation is being entered into your permanent record." He looked at the paper in front of him. "It references the confirmed enemy contacts, the corridor action, the coordination of the SEAL team's withdrawal. It does not reference the specific intelligence work that preceded all of it, the identification of the West Face ambush before the team entered the kill zone." He looked up. "I want you to know that I know that was the most important thing you did on that mountain." She met his eyes. "It's all the same job," she said. "Yes," he said. "It is." He set the paper down. "What do you want next?" She had thought about that question on the flight home, and in the 3 days since, and in the hours she had spent with her knee elevated, being told not to move when moving was the only thing that felt right. "I want to go back," she said. "When the knee is cleared, I want the next mission." Whitmore nodded like he had expected exactly that answer. "You'll have it," he said. She stood to leave. "Donovan," he said. She turned. "Off the record." "Sir?" "I've watched a lot of people do this job. The ones who last, the ones who build something that outlasts the individual operations, they're not the loudest or the most decorated." He paused. "They're the ones who never needed anyone to believe in them to do the work." She thought about the briefing room, the corner where she had sat and said nothing, and listened to everything. The way Mercer had looked at her and seen an argument he was already having with himself. She thought about the mountain, the open face. The 40 meters of exposed climbing with enemy observers on the west shelf, and 8 minutes standing between 16 men and the end. She thought about what it felt like to settle behind the rifle at the peak with the entire battlefield visible below her and 34 enemy combatants who did not know she was there. She thought about her father. Know what you're doing. Do it better than anyone else in the room. Yes, sir, she said, and walked out. Soames was arrested and formally charged 11 days after the mission. The charges included unauthorized transmission of classified coordinates, willful endangerment of military personnel, and conspiracy in the second degree. His attorney filed a motion arguing that his complaints had been ignored through official channels and that context mattered. The motion was denied. Context, the ruling stated, did not convert a deliberate act of betrayal into a policy disagreement. Mercer returned to active duty status 14 days after the investigation cleared him. His first act on returning to the unit was to request a formal meeting with the training cadre. He asked to contribute to the sniper integration curriculum, specifically the section on evaluating assets in the field, without reference to factors that had no bearing on operational capability. He was told the curriculum didn't currently have that section. He said it should. They agreed. Maya Reyes was cited in the after-action report for her surveillance of the enemy frequency, the monitoring that had identified the second element, and the compromised extraction point in time to reroute the helicopter. The citation was accurate and complete. She read it, said, "About time," and went back to calibrating her spotting scope. 16 SEALs went home to 16 families who did not know exactly what had happened on a mountain they had never heard of. They knew the call had come, and the call had said everything was fine, and that was enough. It would always be enough, because the alternative was something families learned to stop imagining. Ethan Cross wrote a letter, not a report, not a citation. A letter, handwritten, sent through official channels to Claire's permanent file, with a note requesting it be entered into the record alongside the formal documentation. It said, "There are decisions that commanders make, and decisions that circumstance makes for them. On the night in question, circumstance handed me something I did not deserve, a soldier already in position, already watching, already carrying the weight of an operation she had read correctly before any of us did. I made one good decision that night. I listened to her. Everything else was hers. She read it once. She did not read it a second time. Not because it did not matter. Because it mattered exactly the right amount, and she knew what she would do with it. She would carry it the same way she carried everything that was true and useful and hard-earned, without display, without performance. In the deep place where the things that actually meant something lived. She had been in this business long enough to know the difference between recognition and validation. Recognition was a record of what happened. Validation was permission you gave yourself. She had never waited for the second one. She never would. 6 weeks after the mission, she was back in a briefing room. Different base, different team, different mission parameters laid out on a different table under different overhead lights. But the same essential geometry, a room full of people who were about to do something very dangerous in a place the public would never hear about, for reasons that mattered more than anyone in the room would ever be fully credited for. She sat in the back. Not in the corner this time. 3 operators she did not know glanced at her when she walked in. She had seen that look 10,000 times. The recalibration. The reassessment. The picture in the head failing to match what was in front of them. She let them look. She set up her rifle case and her kit and her range card, and she waited for the briefing to start. A young lieutenant she had never met sat down next to her. He was 24, maybe 25, new enough that the rank still sat slightly large on him. He looked at her equipment, and then at her, and then at the qualification badge on her shoulder, and she could see him doing the math and arriving at something. "Are you Donovan?" he said. "Yes." He looked at her for a moment with an expression that was trying very hard to be professional, and was also 24 years old, and had just put together where he was sitting. "I heard about what happened on the thing, the operation. Somebody told me about it." She looked at him. "Do your job," she said. "Every time. Better than anyone else in the room. He nodded, took that seriously. She could see him taking it seriously. The briefing started. She listened to every word. She had already memorized the map. In the back of the room in the quiet before the mission, Master Sergeant Claire Donovan sat with her rifle and her training and the absolute unshakable certainty of someone who had never once needed the world to believe in her to do what the world required. The mountain had tested that, and the mountain had found out.